So in a previous video, we finished with our session component, but we haven't actually written any tests to make sure that it actually does what it's supposed to. So in this video, we are going to write a test for this component. Now, before we do anything, I want you to open the composer.json and have a look at the autoload dev section. As you can see, I've namespaced all the tests. So basically our test directory has its namespace as well. In our case, it's going to be up test. So that's how we're going to write our tests, to make sure that we actually namespacing them. So inside of the test directory, I'm going to create a new directory called unit. And inside of this unit, we are going to have a directory called utilities to reflect the structure of our app directory. And inside of the utilities, rather than having session directory, we're going to have one file which will basically test the session component. So it's going to be just new class called session test. And we need to specify the namespace. So it's going to be namespace, it's app test, then we have unit, then we have utilities. There we go. So that's our namespace. And now before we do anything, I'm going to create a base case file. So again, PHP class base case. And this one will be just within the namespace test, app test, because it's right under the test directory. And this one will extend PHP unit framework test case. And I'm going to quickly import it as well. Okay, and for the time being, that's how I'm going to leave this base class. This is going to be the class that we're going to be actually extending from all our tests. So we can close this base case and now extends base case. And obviously we need to import this class as well. So app test base case. Okay, from within a session test, the first test will check whether we can set and get the session. So public function can underscore set and get session. And let's make sure that PHP unit knows that it's a test by adding the test tag. And we're going to start with session manager, and then we call method start. And now you might be wondering already, what am I doing? Okay, let me just explain you exactly how all this is working. I'm importing the session manager here. This is going to be app utilities session and session manager. There we go. So that's the one we are interested in. And now, how am I calling start if our session manager doesn't actually have this method? Now, you may remember we've created this magic method called call static. Now, call static magic method is triggered whenever we are trying to statically call a method on a given class that does not exist within this class. So in our case, this first call was to the method start, and obviously session manager doesn't have this method, and we calling this method statically. That's why this call static gets triggered. And this call static takes two arguments, as you may remember, name and argument. Name represents the name of the method that we are trying to trigger, that we are trying to call, and arguments is an array that would represent any potential arguments that we would pass to this method. Now, in our case, obviously, our start method doesn't have any arguments, so this argument is just going to be an empty array. But name obviously will contain the string start. And now what happens next? First of all, we're obtaining the session driver class name. So we are looking at the session and the environment variable. In our case, if we go back here, we have the session driver. By default, it's file, but because we are running tests here from within the session test, we are going to be running tests through this configuration phpunit.xml, where we actually overwriting this variable and we're setting this to array. So this method, this class name, will return full path app utilities session array session. And when we are running the application within the live environment, it's going to be app utilities session file session. So we store this full class name, including the namespace, within the session variable. Then we are using this call user func array, which will trigger any callable instance. In our case, it's going to be method on the object, because it also can be just a closure, just a function. and then we pass in the arguments to this method on this instance. So in our case, we are going to create a new instance of the class array session, or in a live environment file session, and then call the method with this name, which is going to be in our case start here, and pass any arguments that we could potentially pass through when we're calling this method statically on this session manager. So that's how this structure here works. So it delegates calls to whatever method we are actually trying to call to the specific session driver file. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we start in the session here. The next thing we need to do is to set the session, because that's what we're testing for. So session manager, and we use the method set, which is going to be available on both implementations, as you may remember, because this contract that they implement requires them to have it. We have this set, we have get, we have this has, all, and so on, which is obviously what we have done in the previous video. Okay, so we want to set the session with the key test, and let's give it some value 1, 2, 3. So this is where we're setting the value. So now to make sure that this actually has been set, let's try and assert whether it exists. So this assert true, and we are going to say session manager, and then method has test key. So we're checking whether this specific session has been set, so whether it exists, in other words, with this has method. And then if it doesn't return true, this has method, that means that obviously session hasn't been set. So we're going to put some message saying session has returned false after calling session set, and semicolon after this session. Let's now save it, open our terminal, and within the terminal I'm just going to check that I'm in the right direction. So pwd, I'm in my login directory, which is my project, which is great. Okay, so from within this directory I can now run PHP unit, and there we go. We've got one test and one assertion, and it returns green with the OK, meaning everything works fine. So our test passes. Let's now go back to our editor, and we are going to add another assertion. I'm just going to create a few new lines here. The second assertion will check whether the value equals to what we've set it. So this assert equals, and this time 1, 2, 3 is what we're expecting. And now let's try and obtain the value. So session manager, and then get method test. This should return this 1, 2, 3 because that's what we've set it to. And the message, if it fails, a session get returned incorrect value after calling session set, and then semicolon at the end. So we now have one test with two assertions. Let's quickly go back to the terminal, run the PHP unit again, and there we go. One test, two assertions, both of them are passing. So that's great. Let's go back to the editor. So that's the first one. So we know that our session driver, in our case, it's going to be array session sets and gets the values correctly, and it also has method works fine as well because it returns boolean true or false depending on whether the session has been set or not. Next test we are going to create is going to be called can remove session. So public can remove session, because we want to check whether our session component can actually remove the session. So test again. And now, because we've already started the session and we've set the session in a previous test, what we can do rather than setting it up again is to use the depends tag. Depends on can, set, and get session. What that means? It means that this test relies on the output of this one. So in this test, we obviously started the session, we set it, we check if it exists and whatever value it returns, but it's still set. So we can use now whatever's been set in this previous test and use it in this one. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the session manager and now call method remove with the argument test. So we're trying to remove previously set session within this can, set, and get session test. And now we're going to check this assert false, and we are going to check if this test session exists. Session manager has method, and we pass the name of the session that we're looking for. And then the message will say, in case this assertion fails, session has returned false after calling session remove, and then semicolon at the end. So basically we've set the session and now we're removing it, and if we check whether it exists, it should return false. If it didn't, then obviously something's not right. So let's go back to the terminal, let's run PHP unit again, and now we have 2 tests, 3 assertions, all of them are passing. So obviously this remove method works fine as well. Okay, another thing we're going to do is to check how many sessions are there actually within the session itself. So this assert count should now have 0 sessions, and we are passing session manager all method, which returns all sessions, and then session all did not return 0 after calling session remove. Session all did not return 0 records, perhaps, after calling session remove. That sounds a little bit better. Okay, so we're checking how many sessions are here, because if it is all session manager all will return array, and then assert count can count number of items in this array. It should be set. It should return null, 0 in that case, in other words. Okay, so back to the terminal, let's test it. We have 2 tests, 4 assertions, all of which are passing. So all these methods seem to be working fine. Okay, the last test for our session component will check if we can destroy the session. So public function can destroy session. And now let's add the test tag. This time we're going to start fresh. We're not relying on the output of the previous test. So session manager start. Then we are going to set new session. So session manager set test. And this time this test I'm going to set as an array. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, then A, B, C. And then this assert true, and it's going to be session manager. Oops, not this one. We're looking for this app utility session, not illuminated session. Session manager has test. So it should return true because this should now be set. And we go for session has returned false after calling session set with array. So let's check if that passes. PHP unit, and it seems to be working fine. We have 3 tests, 5 assertions, so that's all good. And the next assertion, this assert equals, no, empty equals, there we go. And it should equal 1, 2, 3, and then ABC when we try and obtain the session. So session manager get test. So that's what we should get back when we are trying to obtain it back. And if it doesn't, then message will be session get returned incorrect value after calling session set with array. A bit verbose, but obviously it puts exactly what we've done here, so I think it makes sense. Okay, let's give it a try as well. Again, now 3 tests with 6 assertions. Everything passes, which is great. And then now it's time to test this destroy method. So session manager and destroy method. And now this assert count. Now we expect to basically have no sessions at all. In other words, when we try and count them, they should return 0. So session manager all method should now, when counted, the output of this method should equal 0. And if it doesn't, then the message will be session all did not return 0 records after calling session destroy. Okay, let's test this again. And now we have 3 tests, 7 assertions, all of them pass, and we've now tested all of the methods declared within our contract and implemented within our session component. So that's our session test completed. We can now close it and move to the next video.